Welcome back to the Taiken Ramen channel. Today, I'm challenging myself to make a farm-to-table bowl of ramen, and it's going to be a black garlic tonkotsu. There's really three big benefits to farm-to-table cooking. The first is that your food doesn't have to travel near as far to get to you. There's a huge decrease in the carbon impact of your food. Second of all, because of the reduced travel time, the food is typically more fresh. And finally, farm-to-table cooking is really good for local businesses. In the end, the food that you create is going to be representative of your community, which is also a really cool way to celebrate where you live. As far as what makes a farm-to-table ingredient, there's kind of different tiers. The absolute best you can do is when you're getting the food direct from a farm. If you can't find the farm that made something, but maybe you find a local purveyor, like a small business, selling them for the farmer, that's like the next best thing you can do. And finally, if you ever find something that's otherwise food scrap and it can be repurposed, as opposed to throwing it in the trash, you can turn it into an ingredient for your dish. I think that because you're saving the planet the waste and upcycling an ingredient, I think that counts as a farm-to-table ingredient. Anyhow, I will explain more as we go along. Let's get cooking. For the soup base, I decided to go with the tonkotsu. Tonkotsu has a really cool history where it became popular in World War II Japan. Pork neck bones were kind of a scrap food that locals upcycled into a really cool soup. So it definitely fit the theme of today's bowl. I did an overnight soak to osmosis out all the blood and gunk. I blanched the bones for 10 minutes and then did a hard boil overnight to emulsify everything. This emulsion went for 16 hours. So it had a really nice deep flavor. So that first bit was pretty easy, broth complete. The noodles were actually the inspiration for the whole bowl. A couple of months ago, I was brewing beer with a friend of mine. It starts by taking barley and then heating it in water to make a sort of barley tea. It's called wort. When you're done with the barley grains, you typically just throw them away, but I had seen somebody online working those grains into ramen noodles. And so I brought these spent barley grains home and then dried them in the oven. I just put them at 250 degrees and let them cook for about 8 hours. And then I ran them through my milling attachment for my KitchenAid and sifted it down, and I had a really good smelling weedy adjunct, which I thought was extra cool. The flour was probably the first big ingredient that was kind of a slap in the face, like, okay, so I want to be good to the planet. Who's making flour in the Kansas City area? Lucky for me, I found a bakery that was selling farm-to-table baked goods. They pointed me to Marion Milling, which is a new company in Kansas City that is milling their own flour, which was a huge W. So I went and got some of this flour, a 10-pound bag. I ended up getting my kansui from the Ramen Supply Company. Even though the Ramen Supply Company is out of Pennsylvania and not Missouri, it is a small business, and the same goes for the salt. But I did end up finding a small business selling salt out of Indiana, and they had their salt for sale at the Dutch Valley Country Market in my area. I calculated out a 35% hydration bread flour based noodle. I used a 5% beer barley adjunct, and I will put the recipe in the description via Gonya's calculator. I really didn't know how that beer barley was going to impact the final noodle, but based on the size of the particles that I was getting out of the KitchenAid milling attachment, I was worried that the gluten structure might be interrupted. So I kept it to 3 laminations to encourage firmness in these noodles, and they rested 1 hour between rolling and cutting. And I recently received a request from Darth Ramen Wednesday to do a little tomomi massage on my noodles after cutting, so you can see me doing this here. After the tomomi massage, I let these noodles age up at room temperature for 5 days before serving, and they cooked for 1 minute. All right, that's noodles complete. Okay, the oil, a huge learning point for me, but also really annoying because I did it wrong the first time. Typically with aroma oil, I would start with canola and then just start throwing things in there and fry it until the canola oil tastes like whatever I wanted it to. But canola oil is not really farm to table. I didn't find any farms that were like, come try our new canola oil. You want to use ingredients that are prolific in your area so that the food takes on a little bit of flavor of your area. So I got to thinking, I can make an aroma oil out of butter, and it's gonna be black garlic. Great. I use this trick where you take a bulb of garlic, roast it slowly over about a week in a rice cooker. You just put it on the keep warm setting, and then I turned it on every night before bed. By the end of a work week, the garlic was nice and roasted. And then I melted down some butter. I put the roasted garlic in with the butter and blended it, and it actually came together nice. But what I had made was compound butter. The butter was just whipped with the garlic in. The next day, I heated it up just to make sure it was gonna work, and guess what? The garlic and butter separated. And at that time, I just tried to heat it up because I realized there was water in the garlic and maybe I could just get it out of there. But as I was heating it, the butter started to burn. And that's because butter has a smoke point of around 300 degrees, a smoke point being when that food is going to start burning. First of all, the garlic was a little squishy coming out of the rice cooker, and that means that it was not completely dehydrated. I also didn't know that butter naturally has some water in it, so that had to be solved. I got some help from my friends on the Ramen Network Discord. Somebody recommended that I brown the butter. That's when you cook butter, and then a watery foam comes to the top, which you can scoop off. And then milk solids work their way out of the butter. Those milk solids, by the way, are what is actually burning when butter hits its smoke point of around 300 degrees. If you remove the milk solids in what would otherwise be browned butter, you're left with something called ghee. Ghee is used in a lot of Indian cooking, but what it is clarified butter, and ghee's smoke point is way up in the high 400 degrees Fahrenheit, which means we can use it to fry up an oil and it's not gonna burn. I went out shopping again and I found an Amish food store that was selling dehydrated garlic chips, which was great. I took the dehydrated garlic chips, put them in with the ghee, and I roasted up this handful of garlic chips until they were golden. Then I took half of the garlic chips out, continued to roast the existing garlic until it was completely black, and then into a blender, I put the ghee, the black garlic chips, the golden garlic chips, and I had saved the milk solids from the butter when it had browned, so those went in there too to amp up the butter flavor. And when I blended those all up, I had a mayu, that's a Japanese word for garlic oil. Thank you to everybody on Discord for saving me from myself yet again. For the eggs, I went to a local dairy farmer and was greeted by a very good boy. I brought him home and did a pretty basic 6.5 minute soft boiled egg. And I did find a cool company in Kansas City that's making American soy sauce, the Pacific Island American Soy Sauce Company. And typically your soft boiled egg marinade will be soy sauce and then mirin, or if you don't have mirin, you can use sugar. Neither of those things being produced on farms near me. So I fried up some white onion slices in butter, hoping to caramelize them a little bit, and then hopefully they would contribute some sweet notes. The white onions, by the way, were being sold at the local butcher near me, which was cool. And then I marinated these eggs for 4 days before serving. So that was ajitama complete. For the protein, I decided to go with a smoked chashu. Chashu pork being pork belly, which is highly accessible. I got some at the butcher. Smoking the meat was a great way to put flavor on it without relying on another ingredient. So I removed the skin off the pork belly, cut it down into a rollable size, and then rolled it into a little log and tied it off with twine. I put it in a Ziploc bag and I marinated it in a little bit of the soy sauce, about a tablespoon of salt. I did need some kind of a vegetable to put in the bag for a little bit of extra flavor in the marinade. Leeks and spring onions are kind of out of season in Missouri right now, so I had to get crafty with this one. I went to the grocery store and I did find leeks and spring onions there. You can tell that they're out of season because look at the quality of these, not really appetizing. I took the tops off of the leeks and the spring onions, and then I took them down into my vermicompost. This is a whole separate topic, but you can use worms to eat your food waste, and then they turn it into this really awesome natural fertilizer. So I paved the worms in onion heads, and then took some of this compost, and then I was able to plant the roots of the green onions and leeks in a mix of compost and potting soil, and within a week, look at this, fresh, beautiful, homegrown onions. And if you think about it, like this is carbon cost zero. I just had to walk onto the porch to get them, so that was a big win. Anyway, leeks go in the bag hangs out in the fridge for 3 days, and then I smoked the chashu per my friend Adam's design. It hung out for 4 hours at 180 degrees, and then I pushed the smoker temperature up to 250, and it sat there until it hit 200 degrees internal. After that, it had a lovely little bark on it. I let it cool off overnight and then sliced it into little thin deli meat sized slices, and then the protein was done. Chashu complete. By far the trickiest bit of the bowl was the tare. Tare being the seasoned sauce that's going to give the bowl its signature flavor. Usually you're using things like sake, mirin, soy sauce. I leaned into what I did have, which was salt, and decided I was going to make a shio tare. So I looked for local agents that could boost the umami content of this tare. I found shiitake mushrooms at a local mushroom farm, which was absolutely sick. I found tomatoes at the Dutch Valley Country Mart. I had those white onions from the butcher, and then the dehydrated garlic chips from the aroma oil that I got at the Amish Mart. I started by cutting the tomatoes in half and then drying them out in the oven, much like the barley, just at 250 degrees until they were completely dehydrated, about 8 hours. The shiitake mushrooms were already dehydrated, and quantities are on screen here, but I put dried shiitake mushrooms, dried tomatoes, and then some more butter fried onions in a container and covered with water, and then let those soak for 2 days. And that made me a pretty concentrated umami dashi. I strained out all of the soaking agents, and then I brought everything to a simmer over low heat. At this point, I did have all of the flavors captured, but the tomatoes brought much more bitter notes than I thought they would, so I needed to mellow that out. I added sliced white onions and then dehydrated garlic chips just to taste, and I let those simmer together for maybe 5 or 10 minutes just until the flavors of the garlic and onions were starting to come through and smooth things out. It had reduced a little bit, so I added water just to bring it back up to its original water line. And then I started adding salt to taste, which made it a shio tare. I ended up going with 2 tablespoons of salt, and in the end it probably could have been a little bit saltier, but if you were going to make this at home, you want at least 1 tablespoon of salt, and then you might add like a teaspoon at a time until you get to your desired salinity level. And then I let the flavors settle overnight before serving, and that's tare complete. When it came time to serve the bowl, I assembled it with 125 milliliters of the tare, 500 milliliters of steaming tonkotsu, 150 grams of the noodles, and then I topped the bowls off with about 5 slices of the smoked chashu, the 4-day eggs cut in half, a little ball of scallions that I had cut up from the onion garden, some purple radish microgreens. I actually found these at the farmer's market the morning of serving, so they were ultra fresh. And then finally, about 50 milliliters of the black garlic oil to round out the bowl. Overall, the real reward of the bowl is I learned so much about what's available in my community. I met so many cool farmers and local food purveyors, and it was just a really cool get to know you exercise with the community. But on to the flavors. If I had to describe the bowl in one word, I would say rustic. Without many sweet components, the bowl overall was extremely rich, salty, fatty, smoky, and those are all things that I would expect if I was getting a home-cooked meal in the Midwest. So success. The noodles were so soft, really plush. I was glad I stopped at 3 laminations because they were softer than I thought they were going to be, but still a very delicious and slurpy ramen noodle. The garlic oil played so nice. I was so proud of the mountain that I climbed with that oil and that I didn't just give up. It had the smoke and slight bitter notes from that burnt garlic with the rich, creamy buttered flavor to it that was really, really satisfying. But by far the star of this show was the chashu. God, I can't believe I haven't smoked chashu before. I may never go back. It was absolutely incredible. A lot of times we weigh down our chashu with so many components, and I was realizing as I was eating this smoked chashu that you do not need a lot of components to drive a lot of flavors. High quality components and the right components can really give you a well-rounded part of your dish. I would say overall for weak spots, the egg needed more sweet notes in its marinade than just those caramelized white onions. So the egg was a touch underwhelming. And then the tare itself, while it did bring a lot of umami, that was definitely the component more than any of the others that I had shoehorned together. So I think that the tare suffered the most from farm to table. Something that was really cool was that my friend who I originally was brewing that beer with came over and brought me a glass of the brown ale IPA that he had made, and that paired super well with the ramen, which was really fun. In the end, though, I was left wanting something a little more complex than just salt, fat, smoke. Although it's extremely important to reflect on what the impact of our food is on the environment, there's got to be a scale between shopping with zero regard to where the ingredients come from and what the impact is, to putting all of your effort in there. And, if you're most of the way, like trying to make responsible decisions where you can, I think that going out and getting some mirin for the egg or some sugars here or there would not make the bowl environmentally irresponsible. Overall, just a really fun thought experiment, and super glad that I followed through with it. So that's a wrap on our bowl for May. I have something really exciting planned for next month, and I hope that you'll be joining me again. Thanks so much for watching me cook today. It's been a pleasure having you, and I can't wait to see you next month for more. See ya.